Celeste Marin had always been drawn to the strange beauty of things others overlooked. At 39, she lived alone in a modest home just outside Cannon Beach, Oregon, a windswept coastal town where thick fog rolled in like a sigh and seagulls circled above rugged cliffs year-round. She was a surrealist painter known to locals for her haunting images of floating staircases and glowing underwater forests. Her studio, tucked behind a curtain of driftwood and ivy, smelled of linseed oil and salt air. Though she rarely ventured into town except for groceries and church, most people knew her name. They admired her work, but few truly knew her. Celeste's life was marked by quiet ache, something too soft to be called suffering, yet too constant to ignore. Years of infertility treatments had left her physically drained and emotionally threadbare. She and her husband Thomas had tried everything: hormone therapy, in vitro, even adoption prospects. But nothing ever took. Eventually, the marriage quietly unraveled. Thomas moved out 3 winters ago, leaving behind only a note and his favorite flannel shirt. Since then, Celeste poured herself into her art and the rhythms of nature. She walked barefoot in the tide pools every morning, even in January. She drank black coffee from a chipped mug and listened to whale sounds as she painted through the night. She said little, but her eyes held oceans. Though she'd never say it aloud, Celeste felt a creeping sense that something was incomplete, not just in her life, but in the world itself. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was a spiritual emptiness she sensed beneath the surface of everything. The news, the noise, the rush to be somebody. She often stared out at the Pacific and whispered prayers without words. That winter, when she felt the first sharp pain in her abdomen, she knew something was wrong. Still, she waited until it was too late. What she didn't know was that the rupture in her body would open more than flesh. It would open a portal to another realm, one far beyond anything she had ever dared to paint. The pain started as a dull cramp low in Celeste's belly, easy enough to ignore in the middle of a cold February morning. She chalked it up to stress or something she'd eaten. After all, she hadn't been to a doctor in months, but as the day wore on, the ache sharpened, stabbing through her side like a shard of glass with every step. Still, she resisted. She was used to weathering discomfort, emotional, physical, spiritual. It had become second nature. She wrapped herself in her worn, gray cardigan and tried to lose herself in her canvas swirling blue pigments over a background of deep black, almost instinctively painting what she felt pressure building, the sense of something about to break. By nightfall, she was curled on the floor of her studio, breath-short sweat gathering on her forehead despite the icy draft from the door. She managed to call 911 before blacking out. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but even through the haze, Celeste felt herself slipping first into unconsciousness, then into something stranger. The moment the EMT placed the oxygen mask over her mouth, she felt her body drift. Not float, drift, like seaweed caught in a gentle current. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even aware she was dying. The hospital lights blurred above her like a halo of stars. Voices echoed muffled. "She's coding," someone shouted. But the fear belonged to them, not to her. Celeste, for the first time in years, felt light, detached, as if she had shrugged off something too heavy to carry any longer. The sounds of the room, the heart monitors beeping, the urgency in the surgeon's voice all faded as she was pulled upward or inward or maybe outward. She couldn't tell. Then in an instant, all sound stopped. What came next was neither dream nor vision. It was realer than real. Celeste was no longer in the hospital. She had left the world behind like a garment she no longer needed. And ahead of her stretched a horizon of glowing blue-silver light that pulsed like a heartbeat. She felt drawn to it and not pushed, not dragged. but gently summoned as if someone had been calling her home for a very long time. And now, at last, she was answering. She expected darkness. After all, wasn't that what death was supposed to be? A void, a closing of the curtain. But what greeted Celeste wasn't darkness. It was light, though not the blinding white tunnel people often speak of. It was something deeper, richer, a blue-silver luminosity that shimmered like moonlight on ocean water. It pulsed alive somehow, as if the entire atmosphere had breath and memory. She felt no fear, only a strange familiarity, as though she'd returned to a place she'd once forgotten. The ground, if you could call it that, felt soft and fluid beneath her feet, like walking across a cloud made of water and light. Everything around her moved, yet remained still, waves of energy dancing in silence. She wasn't in a body exactly, but she was still herself, fully conscious, fully aware. And for the first time in her life, Celeste felt something she hadn't dared to believe was real, total belonging. No anxiety, no aching for more. Just presence. All the years of loneliness, the silent prayers whispered at the edge of her canvas. The aching for a child she never held. They melted away. In their place came a deep, resonant knowing. I am home. And not home in the way she once imagined. This wasn't a house or a memory. This was origin. Essence. The place where her soul had first been sung into existence. Shapes began to form around her. The blue light shifted, parting like mist to reveal towering columns that shimmered like marble but moved like liquid glass. There were no shadows yet, no glare, just a perfect ambient glow, warm and ancient. Ahead stood two massive thrones, side by side, carved into the very structure of the light. She couldn't explain how she knew, but she wasn't alone. A presence, stirred, not one of judgment or intimidation, but of welcome. As if this realm had been waiting patiently for her return. Celeste felt her entire being lean forward in awe. She had no questions, no need to speak. Only a reverence that brought tears not from sorrow, but from recognition. She hadn't stumbled here by accident. She had been called gently and deliberately. And now she was standing on the threshold of the eternal, where all things begin and all longing ends. As Celeste stood in the luminous stillness, her gaze was drawn to the two thrones, vast structures of blue-white brilliance, more alive than carved, as if they had grown from the very essence of this realm. And upon them sat two beings, unlike anything she had ever imagined. They were enormous, easily 15 feet tall, yet emanated a gentleness that softened their scale. Their forms shimmered like water in sunlight, constantly in motion, yet fully defined. Celeste could hardly process what she was seeing, yet her soul seemed to recognize them, even before her mind could catch up. The beings were Olyan and Saphira, though no one spoke their names aloud. The knowledge of who they were simply arrived in her consciousness as natural as remembering an old friend. They were neither male nor female, but embodied both completely balanced, infinitely harmonious. Their hair cascaded like long plumes of light, soft and feathered with subtle hues of indigo and silver woven through each strand. It reminded her of an eagle's crest, only these were radiant and fluid, alive with energy. Their eyes, deep pools of silvery violet, were vast and kind, as if holding galaxies within them. What startled Celeste most was not their appearance, but the overwhelming feeling of peace that surrounded them. They radiated love, not romantic or sentimental, but foundational love, the kind that speaks before language and heals without asking. She stood before them with nothing to offer, no accomplishments to present, no need to explain. And yet she had never felt so profoundly accepted. Olyan regarded her with a slight nod, and instantly a wave of emotion swept through her. Not from him, but from within her, as if being in his presence awakened memories buried in her soul. She remembered stars, She remembered songs without sound. She remembered being part of something eternal. Saphira then extended her hand, not physically but in presence, and a warmth wrapped around Celeste like a rising tide. There were no words, but a message entered her heart as if sung in silence. You are known. You are safe. You are home. And with that, Celeste began to weep, not from sadness but from a joy so deep it broke her open. All the guilt she had carried for not being a mother, all the shame of being incomplete, dissolved in an instant. She saw now that her worth had never depended on what she could or could not do. It simply was. In the presence of Olyan and Saphira, time didn't exist. There was no past to regret, no future to fear. There was only now, this glowing, breathing, intelligent moment. And within it she found what her soul had searched for, across a lifetime of longing. A love that needed no permission, no perfection, no performance. Celeste stood silently, not wanting to leave, not needing to move. She had reached the center of something sacred, and it knew her name. Celeste didn't speak yet. Everything within her was in dialogue. Olyan and Saphira continued to radiate a calm so deep it felt like being held inside a lullaby. Their presence began to shift around her, not in form, but in purpose. It was as if the atmosphere itself leaned closer. Then, without words, a stream of understanding poured into her like light through stained glass. The message was clear, direct, and filled with love. You were never meant to be a mother in the physical sense. That was not your path. That expectation was not your burden to carry. As the words, unspoken but fully felt, sank into her being, Celeste felt a wave of release so complete it left her breathless. For years, she had lived under the weight of silent guilt, wondering if something was wrong with her body, her spirit, her worth as a woman. The cultural whispers, those quiet, persistent ideas that a woman's value is tied to her fertility, had seeped into her bones. But now, standing in the light of eternal beings who knew her beyond flesh and time, that falsehood crumbled. In its place rose a clarity she had never known. You came to create, they impressed upon her. Not children of the body, but children of light, of expression, of color, of energy. You are an artist not by profession, but by divine design. Through your gift, others will remember who they are. Tears streamed down Celeste's cheeks, though her face held no sorrow. What she had once viewed as emptiness now revealed itself to be sacred space, room made for something far larger than she had imagined. She hadn't failed at life. She had misunderstood her mission. Then came a series of visions like ripples across a lake. She saw herself painting with luminous colors that didn't exist on Earth. She saw people standing before her artwork, their hearts softening, their eyes welling with tears. She saw hands reaching for light and finding it. Healing not from science or sermons, but from beauty, raw, honest, divinely inspired beauty. Before she could even ask, the beings offered reassurance. You will return. You have more to do. And though Celeste wanted to stay, she understood. What she had received was not just comfort, it was commission. The ache of her earthly life hadn't been a curse. It had been the canvas. And now she was ready to paint the truth. The moment of return was not abrupt, but gentle, like the slow fading of a dream, or the soft closing of a book. One instant, Celeste stood enveloped in light, surrounded by the eternal peace of Olyan and Saphira. The next, she felt the harsh chill of cotton sheets, the sterile scent of antiseptic, and the weight of gravity pulling her back into flesh. Her eyes fluttered open to a dim hospital room, where machines beeped steadily, and a nurse held her wrist, checking her pulse. Celeste blinked, disoriented. Everything looked familiar, but nothing felt the same. Her doctor, standing nearby with tears in his eyes, whispered, "You scared us. Your heart stopped for 3 minutes. We thought we lost you." Celeste opened her mouth to speak, but what came out wasn't English. It was a series of melodic tones, fluid, high-pitched like whale song, mixed with whispered wind. The nurse froze. The room went still. The sounds flowed from her as naturally as breath, though she had no idea how or why. She wasn't afraid. The language wasn't from her mind. It was from her soul. Later, when she could form English words again, she tried to explain. But how do you describe standing before light that sings? How do you explain receiving a message without sound or feeling eternity in the space of a heartbeat? She gave up trying. Instead, she listened. And that's when she noticed something new. A sensitivity to people's energy. When a nurse walked in, Celeste could feel her anxiety. When her brother called, she sensed his sorrow before he said a word. It was like her spirit had grown ears. She no longer saw people the way she used to, not just as bodies or personalities, but as vibrations, colors, emotions in motion. The gift wasn't always easy. Sometimes it overwhelmed her. But deep inside, she carried the calm of that other realm, the memory of the beings who had called her by name. And she knew, whatever came next, she wasn't going back to who she was. Celeste didn't return to her old life, not really. After she left the hospital, the world felt louder, heavier, too fast. The city's buzz, the endless chatter, even the artificial glow of streetlights, it all grated against the quiet she still carried inside. She lasted just 3 months back in Oregon before packing up her studio, selling her home, and boarding a ferry to a place she'd only ever seen in photographs. The island of Lamira. A speck of land surrounded by the Aegean Sea, known for its quiet winters and wild blue summers, became her refuge. She rented a small, whitewashed cottage tucked into a hillside covered in olive trees and wild thyme. It had no internet, no television, just a wood-burning stove and windows that opened to the sea. It was enough. More than enough. Every morning she walked barefoot along the shoreline, letting the waves wash over her ankles like a ritual. She spoke to the water now, not out loud, but inwardly, and somehow it answered, not in words, but in feelings, in colors, in the images that would later find their way onto canvas. Celeste converted her garden shed into a tiny studio. There she painted like never before. Her brushes moved as if guided by something beyond her. Each piece pulsed with energy, swirls of sapphire, silver, and gold shapes that felt familiar yet unnameable. People began to visit quietly at first. Travelers, artists, even grieving parents. They said standing before her art made them feel things they couldn't explain. Warmth, recognition, peace. Some wept. Others simply stood in silence. She didn't advertise or seek attention. She didn't have to. What she offered wasn't a product. It was a transmission. A reminder. And though she rarely spoke of what happened in that space beyond life, her every painting whispered the truth she now lived by. You are more than this moment. You are part of something infinite. And you are never alone. Living on Lamira, time moved differently for Celeste. Days weren't measured by schedules or appointments, but by tides and shifting light. The ocean became her companion, her teacher, her mirror. Sometimes during long walks along the rocky shore, she would pause and just listen, not to the sound of water breaking on stone, but to something deeper beneath it. There were moments when she felt as though the sea itself remembered her, not the woman she was, but the soul she had always been. In those quiet hours, she began to receive what she could only describe as downloads. Images would pour into her mind like waves, futuristic cities made of light, people moving through fields of color, a world where sound and emotion wove through the air like music. These weren't dreams or fantasies. They were messages, impressions, glimpses of something beyond the veil. She kept a journal by her bedside and a sketchbook near the window. By sunrise, they were often filled. Celeste started writing stories, Odd, poetic tales about humanity's future, about awakening, about remembering who we truly are. She didn't fully understand them herself, but they came through her with clarity and force. One story told of a world beginning to shift around the year 2050, a great stirring in human consciousness, a return to something ancient and pure. The stories spoke of unity, of healing, and of the divine language woven into water. People began asking her to teach, to guide, to help them reconnect to that same sense of wonder she now lived within. But Celeste always answered the same: "I'm not a teacher. I'm just someone who finally listened." She believed that each of us has access to the same stillness, the same guidance, if we're willing to slow down and trust what can't be proven. That message became the heartbeat of her life. Not fame, not legacy, just quiet presence. A life lived in tune. And whenever someone asked her what it was like to die, to leave, to return, Celeste would smile softly and point toward the sea. "It's all in there," she'd say. "The ocean remembers everything, even us." Celeste no longer searched for answers in the way she once did. The restless ache that had followed her for years had quieted. She didn't need to prove anything or understand everything. Most days, she simply walked the shoreline of Lamira, letting the rhythm of the sea speak to places words could not reach. She painted not to impress, but to remember. Each brushstroke was a kind of prayer, one that didn't ask for anything, but offered peace. Her art no longer came from effort, but from listening. And what she heard over and over was this: "You are not lost. You were never alone. You have always been part of something greater." Those who visited her cottage often left in tears, though they couldn't always explain why. It wasn't sadness. It was recognition. Something in her presence reminded them of home. Not the one made of walls and windows, but the one made of light, silence, and belonging. Celeste never spoke much of her near-death experience. Not because she feared disbelief, but because some truths are meant to be felt, not explained. She had seen beyond the veil. She had stood in the presence of beings who knew her without condition. And she had returned not to resume the old life, but to begin a new one shaped by stillness, beauty, and a quiet kind of knowing. In the end, it wasn't the visions or the voices that changed her. It was the memory, the deep soul-level remembrance that life is more than breath, and death is not the end. And when people asked what it was like, what she saw, what she felt, she would only smile and point toward the waves. "The ocean remembers," she'd say softly. "And now, so do I." Call for support. This story was created to bring light, healing, and hope to those who need it most. By liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with others, you help spread a message that reminds people they are loved, they are not alone, and that there is something greater waiting beyond this life. Every comment and every share extends the reach of these stories to someone who may be quietly searching for peace, comfort, or answers. Your support keeps this mission going. Together we can bring more hearts home to truth, to light, and to love. Subscribe today and be part of something eternal.